bring our buddy on, Dan Stein, president of FairUS.org, president of FAIR. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm well, Mark. How are you tonight?
I'm fine. Isn't it amazing how an issue becomes an issue in this country now? I mean, can you explain, I've done my best in plain English, this separating parents from children issue. Can you explain it, please?
Well, of course, it's been building for some time now, but it has its genesis in the fact that courts have been interfering over the last 10 or 15 years and have simply required that juveniles who come in, particularly if they're unaccompanied, can only be detained for a few weeks. Naturally, that means that if people suddenly bring kids, they're getting an advantage, okay? Throughout most of my lifetime and most of yours, people crossing that border have been young males, generally, not always, but generally unmarried, looking for day labor, looking for ag work. Well, with the change in the law, the so-called Wilberforce anti-trafficking law, this court decision settlement called the Flores, I'm sure you've talked about it, which was then expanded in 2015, suddenly you get an advantage if you bring an alien minor with you. Now, the smugglers and traffickers have figured this thing out, right? They figured it out, and so a law that was designed to try to prevent alien trafficking is now being exploited by smugglers and traffickers. In some cases, we don't even know for sure if the people posing as parents are really parents.
What is the advantage that you get?
Well, the advantage is that they get released. They get released into the society. Certainly, the minors do if they're unaccompanied. And if the family units were coming under Obama, then there was a high likelihood the entire family would be released, pending an asylum claim. And under Obama, it didn't matter whether you came legally or illegally. Trump administration said, enough of this. We're not going to let the system be gamed. We're going to prosecute the parents or traffickers, whoever they are, masquerading as parents, for violating federal immigration law, and we're going to put the children through the regular process of placement in these child welfare centers, which look like dorms, college dorms, and then ultimately reunite them with either the legal guardian or the legal parents, after they get released, usually for a week or two or a couple weeks for having violated immigration law. But the big problem is...
All right, stop right there. So they're not there for years?
No. They're not allowed to be there for years.
It's 20 days.
Well, the parents are, yeah. I mean, Jeff Sessions doubled down. He said, look, we're doing this zero tolerance policy because once again, we're going to actually start enforcing the law, right? I mean, when people break immigration law and they bring alien minors, what can you do? There's only four things you can do. You either let them run across the border, which is apparently what the Democrats want. Just let them all run in, and then let them disappear into society forever. The second thing you can do is detain the parents and then try to place the children with legal guardians, which is what they're trying to do now. The third thing you can do is detain the family together, which you can't do legally right now, but that's what Ted Cruz and his new bill wants to do. That's what Trump would like to do, basically keep them all intact as a family unit, because, if people go to jail now, African-American males, if they're incarcerated, they don't get to bring their kids with them, right? The kids, you don't generally send kids into jail, but... So you don't have that option, and then the other option would be to very quickly have an asylum hearing and do the whole process in 72 hours and send the entire family unit back where they came from. Because in most cases, these are fraudulent claims and they've been coached. But all Trump's trying to do is close this massive loophole and reinvigorate immigration law enforcement.
Dan Stein, hold on. We want to carry over the bottom of the break if I can. That's Dan Stein, president of FAIR. You can check them out at FairUS.org, FairUS.org, F-A-I-R. We'll be right back.
The establishment's worst nightmare. Mark Levin. Call in now, 877-381-3811.
As high schoolers graduate, are they heading to places where they'll learn why America is the world's freest nation? That we're the first country founded on the principle that all men are created equal? Will they be taught the Constitution, our rich history, or what makes America great? There's a place where students study these truths, Hillsdale College. At Hillsdale, students study what is true, good, and beautiful. By putting in the work to understand these things, students graduate ready to lead. As Vice President Pence said at a commencement this year, Hillsdale students learn not what to do, but what to be. Hillsdale also offers a stellar education to you, my beloved audience, through Imprimis and free online courses like Constitution 101. Every American can learn like a Hillsdale student from the same professors. Most remarkably of all, Hillsdale provides this service to our nation without taking a single penny of taxpayer money, not one penny, federal, state, or local. I encourage you to learn how Hillsdale can serve you at a website just for my listeners. LevinforHillsdale.com. That's Levin for Hillsdale.com, LevinforHillsdale.com. You really ought to check it out. It is a great college. They go the extra yard, really the extra mile, to reach out to the American citizenry, really like no other college on the face of this country. So I would encourage you to check it out, LevinforHillsdale.com. Dan Stein with FAIR. There was a ruling now by a federal judge in Kansas today, actually just a little while ago. And the judge says that rule Kansas cannot require proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote. U.S. District Judge Julie Robinson sided with, they say, voters Monday. That's some voters. That Kansas cannot require people who register to vote to provide documents such as birth certificates, U.S. passports, or naturalization papers. The decision combines a number of cases that were raised. You know, I guess I'm getting old. I remember a time when you really had to show proof of citizenship and so forth to vote. Why is that so controversial?
Well, because if you value the right to vote, you would require people to prove that they're eligible to vote. And clearly, the Voting Rights Act and the way it's been interpreted by the courts mean that anybody can come in, and for some reason we have to facilitate massive voter fraud. Now, you have to give Chris Kobach, who's running for governor, of course, a lot of credit for fighting this battle, and he's often been alone in doing so. It would be nice if Congress would step in and authorize states to require citizenship when you register to vote, because in the end, how do you measure voter fraud if the data make it impossible to ever detect it?
Well, and I mean, they even fight, even though there was this victory in Ohio, it was a narrow victory, the left even fights in the Democrat Party, states trying to clean their voter rolls of people who haven't voted.
Oh, this goes back 25, 30 years. I remember when Governor Pete Wilson, was trying to cross-check voter rolls with immigration documents, and immediately the ACLU and Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund run to court and claim, it's going to have a chilling effect on... basically this has nothing to do with the voters themselves, but simply cross-checking with immigration records to make sure non-citizens aren't registering. That's a crime. That's a crime against humanity. I mean, in the end, the legitimacy of the voting process itself, just like the legitimacy of our immigration system and the fact that a nation of laws, what are the things that tie us together anymore, Mark? It's common language, respect for laws, cornerstone of citizenship, work hard, play by the rules, you get a shot at the American dream. If we don't have to all play by the same rules, and if we reward cheaters and reward people who cut in line, what ties us together as a people at that point? So, you look at the Democrats now, and you say they don't like Trump's zero-tolerance policy. They don't want to get the facts. They're not interested in the truth. They're not interested in the reality. And so basically, Trump has zero tolerance, and Democrats now have zero credibility. They're not even looking at what caused the phenomenon in the first place. They're not interested in trying to get to the source of the problem, whether it's voter fraud. They don't even recognize voter fraud, or whether it's traffickers and smugglers gaming our asylum system, which should be reserved for extraordinary humanitarian cases. Because, Mark, when you think about it, when you give asylum to somebody, you're allowing them to jump in front of the line of hundreds of millions of people who would like to immigrate to this great country. Now, you have to give that grant very carefully. You don't want to allow fraud. You also want to be very careful not to make it easier to get asylum than if you applied for refugee status overseas. If you give people an advantage by crossing the border illegally to make their asylum claim versus going to an embassy overseas and allow them to pass through 3 or 4 safe countries before they make the, forum shopping before they make the claim, you make a mockery of the entire system. And that's the legacy of what we have from the Obama administration.
Let me circle back. Michael Steele on Friday on MSNBC, these locations where these kids are temporarily located. He says, I call this a concentration camp for kids. Stephanie Cutter, well-known liberal Democrat, well, not so well-known, she said it's like putting them in concentration camps. It raises the question. We have a former CIA director. He just uses the same language. We have Laura Bush, who basically says this is akin to Japanese internment camps. This is crazy stuff, is it not?
Well, it's quackery, and I don't know what Michael Steele's drinking, but and he's on MSNBC, but this is irresponsible. It's ahistorical. It obviously demeans whether it's Korematsu.
Well, they all must be drinking the same thing. I'll tell you that.
Well, I mean, they obviously don't know what they're talking about. The pictures they're showing of these processing centers. These young people are there for maybe a day or two while they're relocated to these very nice college type dorms, while they're looking for legal guardians or their parents ultimately. But they're very nice and certainly under conditions far better than when they were being brought through Mexico at the hands of smugglers and traffickers and rapists and everything else. And, you sit here and you say to yourself, if you don't like what Trump is doing, then you have an obligation to come forward with a viable solution, a viable alternative that will protect the kids, ensure you're not putting them in the hands of traffickers and smugglers, and how you can ensure they're actually their parents, guarantee the safety, and guarantee that they'll show up for their asylum hearings. Notice that everybody who's criticizing the Trump policy doesn't have an alternative.
Oh, yes, they do. Open borders, let everybody in.
That's not an alternative. You see the asylum claims have been skyrocketing because that's what Obama did. He just let everybody run into the country. W was doing that too, by the way. Mm-hmm. And it just got worse and worse under Obama. And the way things were going now, we were becoming the laughing stock of the world. And Trump quite rightly said, I mean, look what's happening to Angela Merkel, right? I mean, she's about to lose her prime ministership because of the immigration issue. Why should we go down the same path of Europe? It all starts with basic fundamental terms of how you enforce these laws. And the funny thing about it, Mark, is it's kind of sad. But if the Democrats would work with the Republicans, they could find a solution. If they would give the policy even a couple of months to see if it truly has a deterrent effect, because in the end it would actually slow the number of people coming across as family units to a trickle, because once the traffickers and smugglers get word that this is no longer an easy route in, once the people back in Central America find out that this doesn't work, you'd be surprised how quickly the market responds and they stop trying to do it. So
don't you think though, for the Democrats, even though the media keeps saying it's Trump who is trying to use these kids for leverage, don't you think the Democrats want this issue? I mean, the media are like the propaganda mouthpiece for that party, and they just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. What's 2,000 people, kids, to the Democrats when they're obsessed over abortion?
Well, when you see Pelosi running down to the border, you know what the jig is up. But look, the Democrats have been getting their clock cleaned by Trump on the immigration issue. He's been getting, he whipsaws them on every issue. He says it's their fault, which it usually is. I mean, the Democrats, when they change the immigration law, like the Wilberforce Trafficking Act, they see it doesn't work as intended, but then they refuse to go back and fix it, just like the 1965 law. Well-intended, doesn't work in an effective way, but they won't fix it. And here you have Blumenthal and these other guys bellowing like Senator Foghorn, just saying, oh, this is a terrible problem, but they won't fix it. Chuck Schumer, all over the 1986 amnesty bill, he won't fix it. Democrats won't work on getting E-Verify, which everybody should be supporting. They're opposed to border control. They're opposed to interior enforcement. They support sanctuary cities. They don't want to support ICE.
Okay, let me slow down. So what do you make of a party that embraces across-the-board lawlessness? They're just power-hungry, right?
Well, it's anarchy. They're supporting anarchy in a quest for power at all costs. And I say this as a guy who's not really partisan, but at some point you have to call it for what it is. They no longer, for the last 100 and some years, since probably about 1910, the Democrats stood very strongly in favor of border control and immigration control. Suddenly, at the end of the Clinton administration and then full on with Obama, they completely flipped. And now it's total anarchy. No immigration law enforcement. Nobody should ever have to go home. Nobody should have to respect immigration laws. And unless you're a murderer or a terrorist, they don't want you to ever see you be deported or removed. And that's completely unsustainable. Jay Johnson, when he comes out and he was the DHS director for Obama, he says, well, what Trump is doing down there is unsustainable. What he's really saying is, I really couldn't get the job done and I'm feeling bad about it, so I'm going to criticize him. Michael Steele, wasn't a particularly effective politician. Now he stands there, you know, doing a dance for MSNBC. You know, he's a turncoat. These guys, why do, it's these Republicans who ought to know better, who ought to be studying the issue well enough to know exactly why we're in this situation before they comment. You know,
Nicole Wallace, she's another one.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm adjusting my wonderful X chair here. I'm sorry. All right, Dan Stein, I want to thank you very, very much.
Yeah, listen,
remind everybody where they can get to your website.
www.fairus.org, fairus.org.
All right, my friend. Well done. I appreciate you. You take care. I'm not kidding. I love this chair. How many times